Welcome to part 2 of the evolution of Bridge 4. This is the second video in a series I'm making following the members of Bridge 4 through the Stormlight Archive, going book by book as they change and grow and evolve through the story. This one, being part 2, will be based off of Words of Radiance, which is the second book in the Stormlight Archive, so there will be spoilers for book 1, The Way of Kings, and spoilers for the whole book of Words of Radiance. I'm going to keep this spoiler-free for Oathbringer and Rhythm of War, so if you're working your way through in anticipation of Wind and Truth, I'll keep it safe for the further books in the series. At the end of The Way of Kings, Bridge 4 is free, and they are heroes, and they have been invited to join Dalinar. And in The Way of Kings, Bridge 4 was kind of its own separate entity. The way that The Way of Kings is told, it's like its own separate storyline that doesn't converge with the rest, or doesn't converge with one of the other storylines until the end. And now at the beginning of Words of Radiance, their storyline and their lives are now interwoven with Dalinar. That coming together at the end of The Way of Kings, that I'm sure we all love, at least I do, is now continuing forward into Words of Radiance. And they have been hired for a job. They don't just get freed, they get given a new life, new responsibilities, and they are going to become soldiers. However, calling a man a soldier does not make him one. And Kaladin is wondering how he's going to turn all these men that he's been given into soldiers. It is a big job. He knows it's a big job, and he is stressing out about it a little bit. And I love that the first chapter with the Bridge 4 characters is just called Bridge 4. I think it's chapter 2. I wrote it down in my notes. It's chapter 2. The second chapter of the book, we're already back to the group of characters that are my favorite part of the story. But Kaladin is not just in charge of Bridge 4 now, or the former members of Bridge 4. He has all the freed slaves. All of Sadeas's bridge crews that got freed are now under his charge. They are all starting a new life, starting their new jobs. They are still dressed as bridgemen. They are filling in the old barracks, filling in the literal space of all the soldiers that had died from Dalinar's army at the end of The Way of Kings. All the open job positions are open because of Sadeas's betrayal. And so now all these freed bridge crews are filling in. And as some of the members of Bridge 4 are walking along, Scar is looking at the other bridgemen, not the Bridge 4 members, but the ones from the other bridge crews. And he's looking at them and he is remembering, feeling how they are looking right now. That feeling of hopelessness, that feeling of what do we even, what's the point of life? He was one of the lucky ones that got Kaladin as his bridge leader. So in this new life that they are given, Kaladin is given the job of captain. He is still a Dark Eyes. He doesn't get to have the title of what a Light Eyes could have been given. Captain is like the highest that Dalinar felt like he could give. And then his chosen lieutenants are Moash, Scar, Teft, Sigzil, and Rock. The personal guard of Dalinar being in the charge of Moash, Scar, and Kaladin. Now, these lieutenants and the other members of Bridge 4, they have a lot more faith in Kaladin than in Dalinar, regardless of the fact that Dalinar is a High Prince and a Light Eyes. They don't know him personally. Yes, he saved them. Yes, he's given them a new life. He's going to pay them. But the one who really got them there is Kaladin. Kaladin is the one that they trust, the one that they follow, the one that they really have their deep faith in. And then in the next scene that is very, sentimental, emotional, the scene where they are getting their tattoos. And now Haber, who, back in the olden days, was the first one to be saved by Kaladin, the first one to believe in Kaladin, and now is the first one to get his tattoos. This is a really meaningful chapter, I think. Chapter, scene, whatever. Moment for them. They are covering up their slave brands. They are physically and visually declaring now that they are free. If they are ever away from Dalinar's army and they get confronted by anyone, those tattoos prove that they are now free men. And then, beyond that, they want another set of tattoos, the Bridge 4 tattoos. This is just something to honor their time there. It was hell. but they didn't stay there. Their time there is what brought them together. It's what bonded them. And they feel like Bridge 4 is so much a part of their identity, they want it tattooed on their bodies. And they feel like being in Bridge 4 is what freed them. And I love that they do this moment of tattooing together. Bridge 4 brought them together, they do this part together. And here, in this moment where they are getting Bridge 4 tattooed on their foreheads, this is when Bridge 4 really starts to become a symbol. Later on through the book, members of Bridge 4 will just reference Bridge 4. We're Bridge 4. Bridge 4 is now a symbol of their past, what they came through, and their bond with each other. And this is where Shen sits down to get his tattoos, to declare his freedom. He is a parchment. Is he allowed? The tattooist doesn't want to. And all those members of Bridge 4 who kind of looked askance at him and didn't want to accept him as part of Bridge 4, now that someone else is saying, is this allowed? They rally around him and they defend his right to be part of Bridge 4, to be free, and to get the same tattoos as them. Nothing to bring people together like a common enemy. And interestingly, Kaladin's tattoo doesn't stick. That's all I'll say. That goes really deep into Kaladin as a character, and I'm sure there will be more to say about that later. Kaladin does think it's a little weird how nostalgic the men feel for Bridge 4. Now that they're past it and out of it, that was their bondage. It was their enslavement, their prison, their punishment, and they're all looking back at that time so nostalgically. They all get it. To them it makes sense. Kaladin is having a harder time feeling that way about it. He would never go back. Not that the other ones would go back either, but they appreciate what they have now because of having been in Bridge 4. I will apologize if this video gets a little meandering. I'm just following the notes I made as I was reading the book. I love that other soldiers from the Kholin army have learned the Bridge 4 salute, and they use it to honor the bridgemen who saved them. Bridge 4. Next, they get their uniforms. A uniform also doesn't make the soldier, but you know, they say, dress for the job you want, or look good, feel good. Once they put on those uniforms, they start to feel less like bridgemen and more like soldiers. And I kind of loved how Moash thought he was going to feel so silly. He feels like he's playing dress up. This isn't really him. But then he puts it on and he looks at himself and he feels like a soldier. He does not feel silly. I think he probably thinks that he actually looks pretty good. And then you have Teft, who knows how to wear the uniform, but he does not feel like he deserves it. And at this point, we don't really know Teft's backstory. We don't know why he feels that way. We know enough about him to know that he has some soldiering experience, but still ended up in a bridge crew, so he's back in a uniform, not sure how he feels about it. And then they tear off the Cobalt Guard patches. Get him off of there. We're not the Cobalt Guard, we are Bridge 4. I have to laugh at that part, but also for them, it is representative of they are still who they started out as. They are evolving and changing, but they will always feel like Bridge 4. They are embracing where they came from. They are not becoming the Cobalt Guard. They're not replacing those dead men, just those positions. They're going to stay true to themselves while fulfilling their new job as bodyguards. This is another place where Kaladin just kind of doesn't get it. Bridge 4 was your prison, I wrote in quotation marks, which means it's a direct quote. And then one of the other characters says, doesn't matter, we're Bridge 4. They can't change who they are or where they came from. From here, they just go forward. And there was a little tension at one point between some of the already soldiers and former bridge crews, and Kaladin has to caution Moash not to start fights. That's not who they are anymore. They're not slaves anymore. Now they are soldiers. They need to act like it. He says Bridge 4 is better than that. So now that they're not carrying bridges, now that they're not slaves, they kind of have to redefine what is Bridge 4. Well, we are better than starting fights with soldiers. And speaking of not starting fights with soldiers, Kaladin wants to put the condition in place that his soldiers don't have to fight unless it's in defense of Dalinar or his family. He's training them to be soldiers, but he's training them to be bodyguards, defenders, protectors. And he just saved his men. He doesn't want to send them out fighting and dying again already. From here, they have a lot of work to do. They have all these former bridgemen to train. Kaladin has Teft take some of the hopeful leaders down into the chasms to train them. So the other bridge crews have heard about Bridge 4 training in the chasms. At first, Bridge 4 started in the chasms as a punishment, but then they kind of claimed the chasms as theirs. So training in the chasms has kind of become this symbol. And so this is Kaladin's way of inviting them in to be part of what they see as Bridge 4. He doesn't want to keep them at arm's length or keep them separate. We are all part of the same group now. Come train the way we trained. I thought that was really smart of Kaladin. And then Sigzil wants to use some of that time in the chasms to work on Kaladin's other special talents. But in Sigzil fashion, he wants to test Kaladin's abilities in a much more scientific manner. He wants to push the limits, he wants to take notes, he wants to measure things, and then you have Lopin, who's just joking like, anything less than flying is not going to impress the ladies. And then, after just kind of some basic tests, they decide to test Kaladin's abilities while fighting. Like, what could he do in a fight? And that's when they discover that Rock is kind of scary. None of them would want to go against Rock. And to them, it kind of feels like they're training their own personal Radiant. Speaking of which, the men who know about Kaladin and his abilities have all agreed to keep that secret. They're keeping it to themselves for now. Kaladin is very untrusting of Light Eyes still. He feels like anything good that he's ever had just gets taken away from him, stolen from him, and so he wants to keep it just between them. So the fact that they have a Radiant among them is like special to them. They're going to keep it to themselves for now, and they're going to keep that trust with Kaladin. And part 1 ends with the arrival of the man who is partially to blame for Kaladin feeling this way, that Light Eyes are not to be trusted and will take things from him. Amaram. And then we get to part 2. I feel like there's still a lot of growth going on for Bridge 4 in this second part. Early on in part 2, we see that these dark-eyed lieutenants and bodyguards, now that they're soldiers, they get to go use the light-eyed practice grounds. And when they walk in and they look around, they're not very impressed. Like, there doesn't seem to be anything special about it. I don't remember if it was Kaladin or Moash who was kind of sarcastic about it and was like, the only thing special about this is that dark eyes aren't allowed here. And then it doesn't seem so special to them anymore. I like that it shows that Bridge 4 is keeping its old traditions, like the stew by the fire. Kaladin is a little unbelieving about the way that they talk about Bridge 4, or that they even keep the old traditions. They don't have to now that they are free and have a new life. They could afford better food if they wanted. Never mind, I won't say better. That would offend Rock. They could afford more fancy food if they wanted. But these old traditions that they did while they were in Bridge 4, to Kaladin represent their bondage, but to the men it represents so much more. It represents their time of bonding with each other, their return from their life of lethargy, from not caring to have something to care about. And it represents when they became that communal group that relies on each other. To them, their transformation happened before Dalinar freed them. The point where Dalinar says, you're free and you're hired, that was the next step, but they had already felt freed. Besides the bridge and the bridge crew being their prisons were also partially in their own mind, the way they just didn't care about life anymore. And having been brought up out of that and freed from that first, that is what having the stew with each other reminds them of. It's why they're still nostalgic, and Kaladin just doesn't get it. In parentheses I wrote, and they still use their old bridge. That seems so weird, to use the hunk of wood that they were prisoners under, and to them, they want it. They want it as that reminder. Oh man. Moash is pressing for vengeance. Now that they're free and they're still there, they have a duty to each other to get vengeance on the wrongs that have been done them. They gain Punyo, Lopin's cousin, one of Lopin's cousins, the first of Lopin's cousins, and then Shen, I don't know if I would say confronts, but he brings up to Kaladin that he is still a slave. He is still seen as one. He's still treated as one. Why doesn't he get a spear? To him, all the fancy words, the tattoos, the uniforms, none of that means very much if he's still being treated the same. And then the horseback riding lessons, that's a fun chapter. Horses are only for the rich. Horses cost a lot. None of the men of Bridge 4 had ever even imagined sitting on horseback. This is something that Dalinar wants them to do, so if it ever becomes important that they can hop on a horse and ride at speed, they know what to do. So I love the part where Kaladin wants to ride Dreamstorm. It's very reckless of him. He feels like he has a lot to prove. He doesn't want Adolin to get the better of him. But I loved the part where he's riding and he hears the other bridgemen, like in the background, cheering. Because I'm just imagining the bridgemen, from their perspective, seeing Kaladin riding that horse that's, like, unrideable, supposedly. And to them, that's just another example of their leader's bravery and courage and how awesome he is. Look at him riding that horse. And then, this is the point. That first little moment where Kaladin starts to doubt Moash. He's not had a reason to before. He has always implicitly trusted all of his men, especially Moash. One thing he liked about Moash was that Moash never idolized him. He just treated him like another person. Personally, when I read The Way of Kings and Words of Radiance, I don't see a lot of depth of friendship between Moash and Kaladin. It's referred to a lot, but I don't think it's shown a lot. But anyway, Kaladin now has a little seed of doubt planted because he knows that Moash was on the balcony before the king fell. But then the assassin in white comes. He strikes again. Miraculously, Kaladin lives. But they lose Beld. Kaladin feels like that was just as much his failure as it would have been out on the plains when they were bridgemen. He still feels so responsible for their safety and for their lives. And Kaladin thinks he lost Habur. Habur, the first one that he saved so long ago. Habur lives, but he's lost his legs. And that's its own heartbreaking moment between Habur and Kaladin. And a very somber end of part 2. Part 3! Gaz is back. If I remember correctly, at some point in The Way of Kings, Gaz is just gone. We don't really know where he went or why he left. He's just not there anymore. And now suddenly he's back. Back with Shallan, and imagine his surprise upon seeing those former bridgemen. He was not very happy. Now, during the high storm where Teft is absent, his absence kind of bothers Kaladin, and so does Teft's response. I don't remember what it was, I didn't put it in my notes, but this is a moment where Kaladin realizes that he's going to have to be okay with the men having their own lives. This is a point of change for Bridge 4, or, you know, the change is already happening, but for Kaladin as the way he sees Bridge 4, before they were one cohesive unit. They were forced into close company and that was it. And now they're able to spread, they're able to be more individuals, and I don't think Kaladin was really ready for that. And as they spread and have their own lives, Kaladin can't protect them as well, which he's far less okay with. And at this point, the old bridge crews are kind of looking up to Bridge 4. Some of them, Pitt from Bridge 17, at least him individually, start to feel guilty for the way they treated Bridge 4 back then. They didn't know. They didn't know they'd ever be free. And now Bridge 4 has another new member, another one that they definitely did not expect, and that is Prince Renarin. Renarin, whatever. I'm gonna say Renarin. Moash does not like it, and the others don't really like the feeling of having a Light Eyes in their bridge crew. Not just a Light Eyes, but a prince. They're not a bridge crew anymore, but, you know, they've always been their own thing. It's always just been them, all Dark Eyes, and now this prince is coming in, and they don't like it, but they trust Kaladin. Kaladin lets him in and welcomes him. And in the evening, part of this evolution of Bridge 4 is that now that they're off duty, some of them are going to go to taverns and stuff. Some of Cal's friends are going to go have fun and they invite him to go. This is just normal off-duty soldier stuff, but Kaladin doesn't go. It's not that he doesn't feel welcome, not that he thinks he doesn't deserve it, he has like this emotional block preventing him from wanting to take part in that at this point. And there's another sign here that the transition of working with light eyes is not completely smooth. So some of the bodyguards are going to train with shard blades because of the attack of the assassin in white, and because it seems apparent that they're going to have to know how to defend against this. A few of them get to be trained with them so they know how to defend against them. So Kaladin takes Teft, Moash, and Yake to train with the shard blades. And here, just like Renarin made the Dark Eyes feel awkward by invading their space, now it's kind of the other way. Now these Dark Eyes are coming in and kind of invading the Light Eyes space and making them feel awkward. And then after this Shardblade training, Moash actually admits that he helped with the assassination attempt. And so now what started as this little seed of doubt between Kaladin and Moash, or just Kaladin felt the seed of doubt, now it's turning into more of a wedge between them. And this is like the first point where the cohesiveness of Bridge 4 starts to come apart. Now before they were like spreading out, having their own lives, going out and having fun. That's all like positive, normal stuff. This wedge is not good or positive. And I kind of like this next part. Kaladin is out inspecting the troops, and he goes back to their barracks for some stew, and he talks to Shen. He gives Shen a spear, and he apologizes. Kaladin never meant to be a man of words only. He never meant to treat someone as other or different the way that Light Eyes treat Dark Eyes. He never meant to do that to Shen. And he offers more than words, not just the apology, but the spear also. And then finally, Kaladin goes to the tavern with his friends. He deserves to have a night off, to go have some fun, and the men are just kind of hanging out. One of the guys kind of likes one of the girls, serving them drinks, and Kaladin realizes that some of the men might go and get married. And Rock is not a fan of this. He's already married, but his wife and his kids aren't there. He says that the men getting married and moving out will split up Bridge 4. And he's right. This was inevitable. This is part of what comes with freedom, is each one of them is free to live their own life. But he can kind of see into the future of them not being so tight and cohesive. And he's not sure he likes that idea of the spreading and leaving each other. It's also during this dinner that Moash takes Kaladin to go see Graves and Danlin, however you say that. And Kaladin is very torn. Their arguments make sense. Kaladin is already questioning the ethics of killing to protect. That's like one of his big things that he struggles with internally. And killing the king and Amaram in cold blood is different than killing to protect. He understands that. He can see that. But the fact that he is so tempted is now placing a wedge between Kaladin and Syl. Remember back when Kaladin was so afraid that somehow the Light Eyes would take Syl from him? Little did he imagine that he would be the one who does that himself. And then the duel, one of the most famous parts of this book. One of the most fun parts to read, where Cal gives his famous line, "Honor is dead, but I'll see what I can do." And if it doesn't go well, he asks Dalinar to take care of his men. That's the part that always gets left out, and the part that I think should be there when people quote this part. And then Kaladin is imprisoned. So I'm trying to look at this more from the Bridge 4 point of view instead of Kaladin, because I already have my Kaladin character study from this book. Imagine being Bridge 4, and your hero, your own personal Radiant, is tossed in prison after doing something super heroic. They want to break him out. Hang the consequences. Let's go get our bridge leader. Not a bridge leader anymore. They're captain, but I think they definitely still see him as their bridge leader. And then when Kaladin comes out, they cheer. Again, with the cheering. I love it. I love that they cheer for him so often. I wonder if Kaladin even notices. Adolin gives Kaladin some shards, which he then passes to Moash. Despite his doubts, despite his moral quandaries with what Moash wants from him, he still gives him those shards, elevating Moash. And now, a member of Bridge 4 is a shard bearer. That's pretty cool. Now Bridge 4 has a Radiant and a shard bearer. And I love that that whole time that Kaladin was in prison. Rock has been simmering some stew. They want to celebrate. And after this imprisonment, Kaladin tells Moash he's in. He's in on the plan. He's in on the plan for vengeance. And besides death, besides having a member of Bridge 4 actually die, this moment where Moash gets the shards is the first moment of Bridge 4 losing one of their members. When Moash becomes a shard bearer, I think in his heart he feels like he deserves these shards. He should have gotten them. In my notes here, I just wrote Bridge 4 is their identity. I'm not sure which part I was referring to. I don't know, maybe just in reference to everything that has come up until this point. Next is the part where Kaladin falls in the chasm. I'm not going to take time to talk about Kaladin's time in the chasm. That's part of my Kaladin video. But the rest of Bridge 4, while Kaladin is missing, have such belief that he's coming back. They know he'll return. They're watching for him. They're waiting for him. Kaladin, their leader, always comes back to them, always returns. He always comes to lead them and save them, and they know he will this time. They are on a rotating watch to make sure that one of them is there when Kaladin gets back. And during the time that Dalinar is going to check on them, it is Sigzil and Teft. And Teft, I found it so interesting. Teft is so confident. He doesn't even have to try to believe that Kaladin will come back. He's not hoping. He just knows. There's like not even a shred of doubt in Teft's heart. He's sitting there watching because he knows he's going to see Kaladin come up out of those chasms. Now the men who know about Kaladin probably expect to see him come flying up out of the chasms. They don't know about his rift with Syl at this point. They don't know that he might not be able to heal with Stormlight, but they know he's coming back. This is also an interesting moment where Teft reveals some of his past to Sigzil. And part of why I find that interesting is because in the before times, when they were part of Bridge 4, running bridges every day, sharing about your past was like forbidden. You don't do that. You don't even share names. And here they are sitting, talking about their pasts. I feel like that's so representative of the new life that they have. And it's also a part where Teft starts to show his struggle. Like we get a little bit of a first idea of what Teft deals with. And then to end part 3, Kaladin is back. No surprise, the bridgemen knew it. And then part 4. This is where Bridge 4 really splits up. There's this expedition going out to the Shattered Plains, and some of them go with Dalinar, and some stay. Most of the ones who stay to protect the king. They're still on rotation. They're still Elokar's bodyguards. Kaladin stays because he's injured. And even though he is injured, he still goes to see his men off. I'm sure that he wishes he was also going with them. And as he's going to see Bridge 4 off, he finds out who is staying behind and who Teft left in charge of the king, Moash. And I know this video is about Bridge 4 as a whole, not just Kaladin, but Kaladin's the leader, also a main character. Kaladin is starting to have a change of heart. He was very tempted and drawn in by Moash's plan for vengeance. He kind of let his hate get the better of him, and now he's realizing that he can't do that. It broke him apart from Syl. It's not the type of person that he wants to be. And Moash uses these two words that have been drawing them together. It's like their battle cry and their life motto, Bridge 4. Moash is using that selfishly. He says to Kaladin, we're Bridge 4. But Moash would have Bridge 4 only care about Bridge 4 and nothing else. To him, we are Bridge 4 means that we are nothing more than Bridge 4. His vision is narrow. Kaladin, the actual leader of the Bridge 4 members and all of the old bridge crews who are now free and under his captaincy, Kaladin has a bigger destiny, but also a bigger vision. And so with Kaladin at the head, Bridge 4 will continue to grow bigger. And then the end of Words of Radiance, that big battle with the Everstore coming, Bridge 4 fights like soldiers. They are soldiers now, and they do their job well. You have Scar and Dre who save Adolin and prove themselves heroes again. You have Kaladin who runs in to also be heroic, fight the assassin in white, and really he reaffirms the oaths that he already spoke. He reconnects with Syl and he lights up. But at the end of this book, Bridge 4 is not the cohesive group it was at the beginning. They are broken. They are splintered. In Book 1, The Way of Kings, Bridge 4 started out as the hunk of wood and ended as the group of people. And in this, the second one, Words of Radiance, Bridge 4 as a group of people grow in size and responsibility and friendship. And by the end, although they have splintered and part of their group is now broken apart, they are being reforged. And no spoilers for Oathbringer. This happens in Words of Radiance, and so I'll point it out. Isn't it interesting that some of the other members of Bridge 4 have started to glow? If you have not watched part 1 of this Evolution of Bridge 4 series, I will link that one in the description, and maybe I'll attach a playlist of other Stormlight Archive content. Thank you to my patrons for all your support. I will put a link to my Instagram and my Patreon also in the description, and I hope you'll come back for the rest of this series before hopping into Wind and Truth. Happy reading, Bridge 4.